Welcome to Excel Basics video number 5. In this video, we're going to build on what we did in our last video and see the power of pivot tables to create reports with various calculations and layouts. Now, this is part of my larger Office 2016 video series, and this is video number 17. Here are all the topics we're going to see in this video. And the goal of this video is to create pivot table reports with various calculations and layouts. Like this one, for example, which is a cross-tabulated report with a slicer. This entire report right here shows us all of the sales numbers in a particular region for a particular product. And with this extra slicer at the top, every number in this report shows the sales rep GG sales. This is going to be amazing. Now let's go over to the sheet data analysis. Remember, the overriding goal of data analysis: go from a bunch of raw data into some useful information. This is what we did last video. This is one of the examples we'll see in this video. I'm going to go over to the sheet Pivot Tables Excel Basics 05. Now, this is the same data set we used in our last video, and we're going to create our first couple of reports from this data set. Remember, this is a proper data set. Field names in the first row, date, region, sales rep, sales. Records in rows, empty cells all the way around. Now, I want to start off by teaching you the keyboard for creating a pivot table, because last video we followed the rules for creating a pivot table. We clicked in a single cell, then we went up to Insert Pivot Table, but we're not going to do that anymore. If we're creating pivot tables all the time, we're going to use our Alt keyboards. Now, we talked about Alt keyboards a few times throughout this class, but if I hit the Alt key, the little screen tips pop up, and they tell you which letter you have to click to get to a particular ribbon tab. So notice it's N to get to Insert. So I tap N. Remember, Alt keyboards are succession. I click Alt, let go. I click N, I let go. And now, of course, I see there's a V. So I click V and let go. There's our Create Pivot Table dialog box. Now I'm going to click Escape because we're going to do this in high speed. It's Alt and V. There you go. That's why keyboards are so amazing. They are fast. Now, of course, it got it right because we had a single cell selected in our proper data set. So the only thing we have to do is check existing worksheet, click in the locations, and I'm going to put this in F3. Click OK. Here's our pivot table field list task pane. Now, we're going to start off by creating the very same report we did last time. Region, I'm dragging it down to rows, and look at that. Instantly, we get a unique list of regions. Sales down to values. And instantly, we get a calculation based on a single criteria or condition at the head of each row. Now, I don't like row labels, so I go up to Design, over to Report Layout, Show in Tabulars. That will put my field names at the top. I want to add some number formatting. Right-click one cell in the values area, number formatting. And I'm going to add currency, 0 decimal places. Click OK. Now, we created the same pivot table report because now we want to see why they named it a pivot table. Notice we dragged down to the rows. We got our orientation. We wanted to see the criteria at the head of each row and sales down to values. But here's why they call it a pivot table. The boss says, I didn't want to see it in rows. I wanted to see it across the columns. No problem. We can pivot the report by clicking the field name in rows and dragging it over to columns. And just like that, we get exactly the same calculations. There's the total for Southwest. There's the total for West. Now, it gets even better. Our boss says, hey, I wanted to see sales rep and region in the report. So no problem. I'm going to pivot that pivot table again, clicking and dragging the sales rep and dragging it down to rows. And just like that, I get what's called a cross-tabulated report. Now, the reason it's called a cross-tabulated report is you can think of it like a cross. That intersecting amount right there, that is a calculation now made with two conditions or two criteria. That total is for the sales made by the sales rep Chin in the region Northwest. If we were manually to go over to our data set, we would have to look through both the region and sales rep column, and only when we found Northwest and Chin do we get to use that number in our calculation. Here's another one, Northwest Chin. So we get to use that number. Notice we can't use Northwest Gigi. It does say Northwest, but it doesn't also say Chin. Notice down here I can't use this one. It does say Chin, but it doesn't also say Northwest. The only other record that meets both conditions or criteria is the last one. So notice if I use my Control key to click, 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 I can look down to the status bar, 1041. That's exactly what we got right there. So cross-tabulated report where any intersecting value shows us adding with two conditions. 1,476, that's the total for all of Chin's sales in the West region. Now, the cross-tabulated reporting layout oftentimes is very compact and easy to read. But the boss comes in and says, no, 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 I wanted each region listed, and then below it, please list the sales rep. Well, we can totally do that. Instead of over in the column, we can take region and click and drag. We are pivoting our pivot table report. When I see that green line above sales rep, I let go, and there's our alternative layout. Both fields are in the rows. Each one of these calculations is still summing all of the sales for Chin in the Northwest region. So that's adding with two conditions or criteria. Now, so far, all we've seen is the sum calculation. And many times that is the calculation we want, but we are allowed to change the calculation. Now, I'm going to drag sales rep. I want to just remove it. You can actually click and drag it anywhere you want. And instantly, the report is pivoted down to a smaller size. Now, I want to change the calculation. And whether or not we have a cross tab or a vertical report with two conditions in our rows or a single condition in our row, if we want to change the calculation, we simply click in one cell in the values area and right-click. And summarize values by have these different functions that we can use to calculate. If I click on average, instantly that's the average of all the sales in the Northwest. That means the actual calculation did what would take us a long time to do it manually. I'm using my Control key. I bet you anything I missed them. But literally, it took all those numbers, added them up, and divided by the count. That's pretty amazing. In just a few clicks, we're allowed to calculate our average for each one of the regions. Now remember, that's not averaging all of them. It's averaging with a particular condition or criteria. For us, the West gives us an average of 777. Now, we have been dragging sales down to values. But now I'm going to remove this. I'm going to click and drag. This is a calculation on a field. I'm going to click it and drag it off. Now, notice we just have our regions. But the boss says, hey, I need to count how many sales we had in each region. Now, what would we do manually? We'd go through and count. We'd just say 1, 2, 3, all the way down to however many it was for Northwest. But in a pivot table, you actually take the region, drag it down to rows, but then you take the region and drag it down to values. Now, I haven't dropped it yet. This is a text field. When you drag a text field into values, it defaults to count. Number fields default to sum. But there you go. We were totally allowed to drag region, a text field, down to values, and we have our count. We had 10 sales in the Northwest, 4 in the Southwest, and 8 in the West. Now I want to learn another great trick. The boss said they wanted one report for the count and then one report for the total sales. Well, I've already created this pivot table, so watch this. I'm going to copy it, highlight everything, Control-C, and down below, I'm going to Control-V to paste it. Now I'm simply going to come over, drag count of region off, and sales down to values. Right-click, number formatting, currency, click OK. Now I'm going to come up and change the column width here. Now we have both of our reports. Now, one thing you don't want to do is if my cursor's in the top report and I were to drag sales rep down here, well, this is a pivot table that can pivot and totally extend down below where it's currently sitting. Notice I have something down below. Now, it's polite if I drag sales rep below region. It's totally polite. It reminds you that it cannot overlap another pivot table report. I'm going to click Escape. All right, so we did sum of sales for each region, counted how many sales we had in each region. Now we want to go see that whether you're working on a small data set or, let's go over to the sheet large data set. We have a large data set here. It's still just as easy to create a pivot table report. Now, I got to teach you the keyboard to see how tall a particular data set is. Because what I don't want to do is grab the scroll bar over here, and I don't want to use the wheel on my mouse because it'll take forever. I'm going to use Control-Home to jump back to cell A1. The keyboard to jump down to the bottom of the data set is Control-Down arrow. What it really does is it keeps going until it sees an empty cell and then stops one above. Wow, look at that. Over 13,000 records. Now I'm going to use Control-Home to jump back to cell A1. Now notice our data set here has the date, the product we sold, the sales rep who sold that product, the region it was sold in, and the particular sales amount. What we would like is a cross-tabulated report that shows product and region. So I'm going to click in a single cell. Don't highlight more than one cell because it won't work. Click in a single cell. And we want to put the pivot table report on a new sheet. Now we're going to use our keyboard, Alt-N-V. But we want to notice something. And actually, we've talked about this through this entire class. The button that's highlighted in any dialog box can be invoked if we use Enter. So if I hit Enter, it totally puts a pivot table on a new sheet. Now I'm going to right-click the sheet and point to Delete. I'm going to click Delete. And the reason why is if you're creating pivot tables on a new sheet, you want to be quick with the keyboard. Alt-N-V, Enter. Just like that, we have a new pivot table from that very large data set on a new sheet. I'm immediately going to come down and double-click this. And I called it Product Region PT and Enter. Now, we're going to drag product down to rows. And instantly, we get a unique list of products. I'm going to drag region over to columns. We get a unique list across the columns. Sales down to values. Instantly, we get a cross-tabulated report. I don't like row labels or column labels. So Design, over to Layout, Report Layout, Show in Tabular. Right-click any one cell in the values area. Right-click, Number Formatting. Currency, 2 decimals is fine. Click OK. Now I'm going to use Control and Roll to zoom in. The fences have been put up so we can't see anything. I'm going to change the column width. And I'm going to change all the column widths to the same width by clicking on A, holding the click, dragging all the way to F. I'm going to grab between any 1, 2 columns with my change width cursor and click and drag. Now I'm going to click inside the pivot table. That's already amazing. That calculation right there is the total sales for the Bellin product in the Northwest. Now I'd like to add some formatting to this pivot table. So up in Pivot Table Tools Design, we're going to use Pivot Table Styles. Click the More button. Click, and you can pick whichever one you want. I'm going to try and pick light blue Pivot Table Style Medium 13. You can pick whichever one you'd like. Now we're going to take this pivot table to the next level. Any one of these calculations shows the total for a particular product in a particular region. But I'd like to see all of these numbers for a specific sales rep. So in the pivot table field list, we could drag sales rep down to filter. Now when we do this, filter, there's a drop-down filter. We can click the drop-down. And if I click on GG and click OK, instantly all of these numbers are for GG. So when I click in West Quad, yes, it's West Quad, but it's GG sales in the region West for the product Quad. Now instead of using filter here, I'm going to click and drag this off. There's a much better option, a more visually interesting option. Click in a single cell, Pivot Table Tools, Analyze, and in the Filter group, let's click Insert Slicer. And there's our Insert Slicer. I can check Sales Rep. Now when I click OK, now we have a visual filter or an additional criteria that will affect every single cell in the pivot table report. When I click on GG, instantly, these are all GG's numbers. Right there, those are all the sales in that original data set where the region is South, the product is Majestic Butte, and the sales rep is GG. Now, let's format our slicer. We click on our slicer. We might want to increase the number of columns. I'm going to increase it to 5. We can resize it. I can click and drag. Now I would like to insert a few extra rows above the pivot table. Selecting number 1 row header, I'm going to click and drag down to 4. Then I'm going to right-click Insert to insert 4 rows. Now I can move my slicer above. I can even come up to Slicer Tools, Options. There's our columns, but over here we have Slicer Styles. Click the drop-down. I'm going to select that one. You can pick whichever color you'd like. And there we go. Northwest. Carlota. That $27,408.97, that is adding with 3 conditions or criteria. The 3 criteria are Northwest, Carlota, and GG. Now, notice something. When we have a slicer, of course, Northwest, Carlota, GG. But when I move over to a different set of column header criteria and row header criteria, that cell right there is South region, product Majestic Butte, but it's still for GG. So the criteria up in a slicer affect every single number in the table. That Northwest right there affects everything in this column. That Carlota affects everything in this row. All right, that was a lot of fun with pivot tables. And we created our cross-tabulated report. We even inserted a slicer back over on Pivot Table EB05. We saw that when we drag a number field to the values area of a pivot table, it defaults to sum. And if we drag a text field like region down to the values area, it will default to count. We also learned that ever important keyboard, Alt-N-V. All right, that was a lot more fun with pivot tables. If you like that video, click that thumbs up. Leave a comment and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. All right, we'll see you next Excel Basics video. See you next video.